Again, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for attending our monthly member presentation series. Today we have the pleasure of hearing the life story of our friend and neighbor, Admiral Dick Avrit. Dick was raised and had his early education in Sitka, Alaska. Upon high school graduation, he entered the U.S. Naval Academy, graduating in 1953, and promptly went into the Korean War on a destroyer. In addition to Korea, he saw action in Vietnam, the Cold War, the Middle East, and others. In his career, he served on 8 ships, commanding 3. After being selected for Rear Admiral, Dick was assigned a project manager for building the Saudi Arabian Navy for $15 billion. Dick provided them with 14 ships, trained crews, and built 3 bases in Saudi Arabia. Following the Saudi Arabia program, Admiral Avrit became Director of Navy Logistics and Sealift on the Chief of Naval Operations Staff until retirement in 1985. Dick's story continues, but we will let him tell the rest of his fascinating career. Please join me in welcoming Admiral Dick Avrit.
Thank you, Dave. Go Navy. Go Navy. Go Navy. Well, shipmates, it's good to be with you. And to relate a little of what I've gone through in the years up to now. What I'm going to do today is go through my boyhood years in Oregon, Washington, and Alaska. Alaska will be more interesting than the first 2. And then Navy years, and I listed all the states that I've lived in over the time, and the tours of ships that he just mentioned. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the post-Navy years and the fun I've had since then. And it's all been fun. It really has been very fulfilling. I want you to know that, first of all, my immortal father was King Neptune, and my mother was Molly Mermaid. I was born on the crest of a wave. I was rocked in the cradle of the deep. And when they got tired of me, they passed me to my mortal parents. And Dad and Mom, Roy and Louise, and my father was a lumberman all his life. But we'll cover that as we go along. I was born in Tillamook, Oregon, which, of course, you've seen Tillamook products in the market, Tillamook cheese and Tillamook ice cream. And ice cream is really good. After about 1 year of life, I moved to Prescott, Oregon, which is 40 miles down the river from Portland. And I lived there and it was educated in a 2-room schoolhouse, grades 1 through 8. But I only got through 5 of them. And that's when we moved to Alaska. One word about why we moved to Alaska. The lumber mills in the Pacific Northwest were running out of logs, and there were lots of small lumber companies that were becoming available if you wanted to buy them out. It turned out that in this particular era, the Japanese were invading the Aleutians, and there was a building program going on by the Air Force, Army Air Force, in Elmendorf Air Force Base in Anchorage, and they needed lumber. And so the opportunity was to build a lumber mill in Whittier, Alaska, and I'll show you what that was all about. And that's why we ended up going to Alaska. We went there by way of Seattle. I spent the grade 6 there, or a good portion of it. And going from a 2-room schoolhouse to a big metropolitan school was unbelievably difficult. To me, people were diagramming sentences. You probably all know that. I didn't, coming out of that little schoolhouse, so it was bewildering. Anyway, we moved on. There I am, by the way, feeding a deer. I thought I'd stick it in there because we can do that again right here on our own property. As you know, Alaska is looked at in different ways. Seward's Folly, $7.2 million in 1867. That was a good price tag even then. The gold that flowed out of there, and now the liquid gold that comes from there is further populating the world. The population in 1921 for Alaska, which is 1/5 the size of the United States, is only 732,000 people. So you can see it's not a thriving place with lots of people. Note the land bridge between Siberia and Alaska. That little point through there has been alleged by archaeologists over time of how all the prehistoric things have gotten wrapped up. And okay. Oh, one star has moved. One star, there's over there on the Alexander Archipelago, which is right in here, is Sitka. And that star is supposed to sit on Sitka and say that I lived in Sitka. I lived in the other two stars, which are Seward, Whittier, and Anchorage. Back up one notch, would you please? Right at the intersection of those Canada and this Alexander Archipelago, there's a little place called Mount St. Elias. I don't know they call it that today, but that's what it was when I was there. And that sort of marked the separation between the two countries. But more than that, it was also embedded in the mountain strain that ran across that part of Alaska, separated Anchorage from the warmer part of the Pacific Ocean that came up from Japan. And the whole region around this area was always quite warm. But on the other side of the mountain, going from Anchorage up to Fairbanks, it was cold. There's a picture of Mount St. Elias as my father saw it on one of his many airplane trips back and forth to Anchorage. The pictures here are two of the fjords that ran off into Prince William's Sound. And I'll show you the effects that those fjords had in just a moment. But it's very rusticate, it's very beautiful country. You can see that range there that keeps the warm air south and the hot air, cold air north. I gave you some statistics here, if you can see them. 73,000 people in 1942, and then we had a war and build-up and so on. And so now we have 732,000. That's less than 1 million people living there based on the 2021 census. And Anchorage grew from 3,500 people to 288,000, clearly the largest city in the area now. 2,000 people in Sitka in 42, and then built up, and now it's 8,004. When I was there, it was 4,000 people. And you can imagine going to school in a town of 4,000 people, you couldn't go wrong. Everyone saw you. Significant events that went on during that time. I'm sure you're familiar with the Japanese and the Aleutian Islands, and the Alcan Highway was underway to solve some of the problems. And long lasting statehood, it finally came around 1958, 59, both Honolulu and Alaska came in, one Democratic, one Republican, so it balanced out. That's what's wrong with Washington, D.C. There's nothing to balance it. Whittier, Alaska was the area that drew my father up there to build a lumber mill. It is, this little piece here is an Army port of debarkation where all the stuff going into Alaska flew through there and into a rail train that ran through a great big tunnel in a mountain and off into the flatlands on the other side to Anchorage and Fairbanks and wherever else they had to take it. That was a good place to build in because we had the railroad train right there that could carry lumber in. And Whittier is, well, I say it here, the American flag is obstructing my view, but you can see 249 inches of snow. It's the heaviest snowing area in the whole of Alaska. Today's temperatures were 33 and 24, and the precipitation was snow. And that's typical of the coastal areas. I suspect even in Kodiak or Sitka, the temperatures were like that in the wintertime. They're not really super cold, but they're snowy. And that's a typical view of the area. That's a duplex there. So it's running up the side of that. The picture of some of the snow inside of that. What they do in April is start bulldozing it all out so that the lumber mill can be exposed and they can start producing lumber. And that's a typical lumber mill. You know, Mark 1, Mod 0. Seen one, you've seen them all. That was 100,000 square feet of lumber per day. It was a good producer, and it was very profitable in the work they did for the military. The logs for that came all from southeastern Alaska, and they were towed across the Alaska rough oceans, which was something. In March of 1964, a 9.2 magnitude earthquake happened in Prince William Sound, which was which this is a piece, and it extended for 4 minutes. It was the second largest earthquake in the world, and so you might expect it had some effect. The tsunami, we think, was 75 feet in here. Elsewhere, it went as high as 600 feet. And in Valdez, another city in Prince William Sound, went to 150 feet or something like that. So it was just devastating. This whole thing that you see here was totally removed. There wasn't a thing there when it was all done. The boilers that the stacks fired, only the boiler was lying in the debris at the bottom. Everything else was gone, including the caretakers. There were 2. And they were washed out to sea. I understand that the tsunamis hit before the end of the 4-minute duration earthquake, so there was no preparation whatsoever. After that mill was built and operating, we moved to Sitka, and there too was another place. And you probably visited Sitka. Here I am as an 8th grade graduate. We were supported in the war times with boats like that, ships, and they would bring produce and canned goods and other things, and they also would carry some passengers. So there were several of those that shuttled around and kept us alive. Those of you who have been there recognize the spire in the center of the city. Right behind that is the high school that I went to, and over here is the lumber mill that I knew so much about. And you can see the smoke and steam coming out of it. The home I lived in, typical Sitka home, and there are 2 industries there at the time I lived there. One was the fishing fleet, and the other one was lumbering. And here is Columbia Lumber Company. And my father ran that mill, and I worked every menial task in that while I was in high school. And I learned a lot about that, which may account for what I did next. The lumber was put on barges and hauled away. Some of it was driven through the town and put on ships that were at anchor at those berths. You can see the hemlock and spruce, those trees got really quite large. The Forest Service controls all that, and it works on an annual a century yield, sustained yield basis now. Is a more concurrent view of Sitka. The lumber mill used to be right here. That's the visitor center, and all the crud that used to go onto along the seawall here is no longer there, and this nice little harbor for small boats. Another one over here too. The fishing fleet is still there. It lives a little bit further to the south. The mountains, the Three Sisters, 1, 2, 3, those are there. This mountain is the Harbor Mountain, and that mountain is Vestovia. Both are treed with Sitka spruce largely, and they have been logged all the way up halfway, and you can see that as you look at the mountains. And the reason for that was when this was the Russian capital, and when they owned it, they built boats, and in the boats they would pack ice from the local lake that used to be here, there I think, and send them down to their colony in California. And guess what the name of that was? Wine connoisseurs.
Russian River.
That's it, Russian River. And I can only think that they sent back on those boats lots of fresh stuff and wine. But anyway, what's really changed in this little town is that bridge right there. It bridges over to Japonski Island. Japonski Island was a naval base in World War II, and only sea-based aircraft operated there. They had big hangars. They put them in, service them, and so on. And they converted that to a landing strip. Unwanted shootout. Great place to grow up as a child. We could go out and hunt just on the outskirts of the city, and particularly in the fall when the snow's coming down, all the deer and the bear and everything would come down with it, and they'd all gather around the streams at spawning time. The fish are going up, and the bear come down, and there the two shall meet. Well, when we go out hunting for deer, we have to be careful with bear. So we're always carrying a heavy caliber rifle to cope with that situation. And I got into a situation where I was coming home from hunting. I heard behind me, and I looked back, and there about 100 yards was a bear following me on the same trail. So I speeded up, and so did he. So I had no choice but to make a choice between him or me, and so I chose it. And when he dropped, I went away as fast as I could. I have no idea what happened to him. And here's my graduating class, 10 of us. And we were fully integrated. There's an Alaska Native, and there's an Alaska Native. And they were integrated in such a way that it was just so normal and so natural. There wasn't even talk about it. Delegate Bartlett, this is a territory now. This was not a state. Delegate Bartlett, our one representative to Congress, I met him when he came to town for whatever reason in September of my last year, and I told him that I would like to go to West Point, and he said, "Well, you give me a letter of all your qualifications and your motivations for this, and I'll see what I can do." This was unbeknownst to my parents, and on New Year's, I wrote that letter, and then on New Year's Eve, I got a letter from Delegate Bartlett saying he had made me his principal appointee to the Naval Academy. To which I said to my father, "Where's that?" Talk about hayseeds. And here I am, first class, already with his hair dropping out. And there is the focal point of our campus, the Marine Corps Chapel, and good old John Paul Jones lies underneath there, the founder of our Navy. I'm going to show a bunch of these ships as we go through it. Each slide will have the length, width, and draft, and it shows you how long I served in there, typically 18 months to 2 years, where it's based, and the things that I did. And I won't keep repeating those. You can see those as readily as I. This is George K. McKenzie. I came out of the Naval Academy, hopped aboard that, and headed for Korea. We're right at the end of the Korean War, but into a good cold winter. And the winter would cause ice, the sea water would break up over the ship and freeze. And so we'd have to get out and chop the ice off in order to keep from getting top heavy. So that's the most unique thing I remember about Korea. Other than that, it was just a short bombardment handling missions that were called, and not many of those before it was a ceasefire. One other thing about destroyers and all other ships of the line is what the prop agent, my flower girl, by the way, and I'll talk about that in a while. This commissioning pennant flies from the masthead of every commissioned ship. And there's a commissioning ceremony, and that happens. This flag is broken. And it continues that way on the ship until it's decommissioned. And that's what commissioning and decommissioning is refers to, as playing with that. The only time it comes down is when a flag officer embarks on the ship. It's hauled down, and the flag officer's pennant is broken, or flag is broken. And then as soon as the flag officer leaves, boom, that comes right back up again. But I thought you'd like to know that. So if you don't know whether the ship is commissioned or not, look up at the masthead and you'll see it. Thank you. From there I went to Newport and got aboard a ship that was newer than the ones that World War II kind that I'd been. That was built in 1954, and it had some interesting things on it. That's a 5-inch 54 weapon, which is on all of our ships today. There's a 3-inch 70 that, to my knowledge, vanished. I have no idea where it went. I never saw it on any ship after it was on this class. And this was sort of a unique time. I was an electronic material officer working with some of the World War II stuff that we'd had on the other ones, but a lot of new stuff too. And the Navy Tactical Data System began to show its head. We were equipped to track targets with an analog system, and how effectively they could be detected and tracked. And that became the core of the whole Navy system that's out there today. But it was fun to see the leading edge of it. I decided early on, when I was on that second ship, that I would follow my path into the electronic world, either through the Navy or through civilian life. And the Navy sent me there, so that solved it. I got in 3 years, I got an MS Engineering Electronics degree. The reason for 3 years is that the sponsoring material commands for these graduates required a set of disciplines that would match all of the equipments and systems and operating environments that the ships would operate in. And that's the reason for the lengthy time. While there, I got into jazz. The first Monterey Jazz Festival was held in the area around, right across the street from the postgraduate school. And it was pretty fun to do. A classmate of mine and I got persuaded Ampex Corporation to do the sound recording and the recording of the soundtracks. And at that time, Ampex was very tall in the audio world, and they did a great job at it. The second most important thing here, third, really, first. How do you put it? It's different. I met and married Dani Tamaja on July 11th, and that left one more year to go, which was just a beautiful time. We lived in Carmel, California, in a little pink house, and we could walk down the street every day and any time and have an ice cream cone and stroll through Carmel. If you've been in Carmel, you'll know what a beautiful place it is. I really had to struggle with grade point averaging this year. As we graduated, the class had all the expertise in the world. And you'll notice that the one member of the class who made prints of all that did it backwards. All the ribbons are on the wrong side. So you're looking at the reverse. Anyway, so much for education. While graduating from the postgraduate school, I got my diploma, sort of. And holding in his hand down here is a log duplex Decitric slide rule. And any of you mathematicians here would have lived with that in your hand just like I did, and just like this guy did. That preceded the little hand calculators that followed. I went from there, ready after 3 years in the higher realms of electronics. I went to an LST of World War II vintage. And the only thing that was different was that little radar up there, which I think they bought from people that made them for fishing boats. And so we had a modern surface radar that we could see contacts around. Other than that, we were pure relic of World War II. And if you remember your views of Normandy, you saw hundreds of these guys living on the beach because they could open the bow doors and let vehicles come out from the inside, as well as they have a cargo here and a crane, and they can lift things out that way. But as you can see here, it's the only ship you can ground in the U.S. Navy without getting court-martialed. Its motion is to ground. And here I am grounded. I took some Army people up to British Columbia, and they just couldn't get off fast enough, so the tide went out, and we had to wait till the tide came back in to get back in the game. What do you do with sleepwalkers? When a ship was moored in the southern part of San Diego, and one night the officer of the deck heard a call, "Halt, help, help, help," and the person was in the water. So they got him out, and the question was, "Why are you in the water?" And the answer was because he was sleepwalking. He was dreaming he was walking down a field, and there was a horse in that field that was one that he had cared for years, and he leaped over the fence, and the next thing he knew, he was in the water. But it doesn't stop there. We sent him to the hospital, they evaluate him and send him back and say, "Tie him in his bunk." So we tied him in his bunk, and we went off on refresher training, and we would come in the evening time and moor a buoy out in the harbor, not alongside a pier. And darn if it didn't happen all over again. He got out, walked down, jumped over. And that time we sent him ashore and said, "Don't send him back." That's what the LST can carry on the deck. They can carry causeways lashed to the sides. Causeways are things that you can put on the beach and took 2 or 3 in line, and then you can get big ships at the end of them. Okay. Key West, Florida. Oh my. This was sort of a payback tour. I was involved in the SQS 2600, a lot of other weapons evaluation too, miscellaneous sort of stuff, but that added 2 more years to my tour down there. And it's what's called a bottom-bound sonar, so you can send the information down the bottom of the ocean and bounce it back up again and get a target and come back down and back to the sonar. And it uses sophisticated target retrieval behind the noise, and it really works. And they're all over the fleet today. And so I was involved deep in that. I did the first T&E simulation, and that got everyone's attention. I was in Key West, Florida, and they sent me up to the headquarters in Norfolk to say, "Hey, this guy, have your people take a look at this, see if this makes sense." So we went through it all, and it made sense. But we were doing this with punch cards and Fortran. So I became very proficient in Fortran. I just mentioned in passing that we were never known as Key West. We were always known as Key West, 90 miles from Cuba. That phrase in every newspaper. So that gives you the idea of the era that I was in. The audio-video expert here, Tamara, came to join us here, and there she is. And Lee would like to have that car, I know, and so I was going to call that to his attention. He'll pick it up. And played a lot of tennis down there. I ruptured an Achilles tendon. But the thing that got my wife's attention, she arrived there 8 months pregnant. And we walked around from the hotel on the first night, and we saw a scorpion walking across just as plain as you could be, and a dead snake a little bit further on. And I think she had second thoughts about the garden spot of the Southwest. And we evacuated for hurricanes without end. From there, I went to the Berkeley and off to the Vietnam War. It's amazing the kind of things that we do here, and I'll explain it a little bit on the next slide too. It's shore bombardment. Our job is to keep the logistic resupply of South Vietnam from using waterways to get it there. And coastal batteries are placed all over the place that they keep shooting at us when we're shooting at them. So we're always involved in counter battery fire. The thousands of rounds were fired at us. One particular one that was most notable was we had 450 rounds of shore fire that straddled us, but we didn't get a single hit. We had lots of shrapnel on the deck, but we didn't have a single hit. Talk about luck. No sooner did I get back from that Vietnam tour than I ended up as operations officer on the staff that went back in to coordinate the surface warfare in the Tonkin Gulf. And it was really an arduous kind of a thing, controlling the ships and the missions that they were on. Here's, I don't remember whether this is Iowa or Michigan or Missouri, but those 16-inch guns would fire about the equivalent of a Volkswagen, 16 miles. And here's the sort of thing that would happen after a mission, all those wonderful things. What we would do is, some of them is cut them off and use them as ashtrays. And I'll bet there are more ashtrays through the United States now that look like the tail end of one of those shell casings. They were very nice. They're brass. And the waterborne logistic craft was what we were after. These are the guys that carried the stuff down, and our job was to not let them do it. In this job, I also had the task of keeping a clinging rescue destroyer always ready to pick up flight people coming off the land that were, shot bad up and couldn't get to the aircraft carrier. And they'd land near the plane, the ship, and they'd be recovered. From there, I went to the other Atlantic, and we were in Charleston, South Carolina, and it was a delightful time. I had to take a ship out of overhaul and through refresher training and getting it up to fighting strength and get people so they know what to do. And then off we went to operate with the Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean and with all of our friends and relatives that were out there. My wife actually followed that ship. We met out in Spain and had a delightful time together on the coast of France and so on. But the unique part of this is we spent two-week tours in Corfu, which is the home of Club Med. So the crew loved that. Then it was off to the Naval War College, and that was really serious work. We worked in international relations, strategy and tactics, wargaming, and I might mention in passing that you have probably seen it in the open literature too, that every war game that has been done in defense of Taiwan by military forces has resulted in failure. And so you kind of have to wonder, why we speak so belligerently about defending Taiwan when we can't even show that we can do it ourselves. So that's a problem waiting to be solved. A lot of snow there. I wrote a thesis, big thesis, and everywhere in the thesis after I got it back, the War College provided the typist, but every place in the thesis, guess what showed up? So they had to retype it. This was the era when color TV for us came into our life, and Coach Landry and Roger Staubach were standouts with the Cowboys and America's team, and boy, were we staunch supporters. It faded. Then off to the Office of Secretary of Defense for another 4-year tour. It seems like every tour after graduate school, and we're 4 years in engineering, one way or another. Surface weapons program. I can't begin to talk about all the programs that I'm involved with, but here's a picture of a ship with many of the electronic stuff hanging off from. The one that's really interesting is the one on the, see how the edge of the superstructure is tapered at 45-degree angles, and it is an after part of the ship too. That's the Spy 1 radar, better known as Aegis, and that's what caused me to spend 2 more years. The Aegis weapon system was the only system on the drawing board the Navy had that would cope with the missiles, the air-launched missiles that the Soviet Union were introducing. And so we were behind the power curve, as frequently we are. And so that's what kept me there for a long time. Extensive interaction with defense industry. We reviewed their IR&D. Every contractor, that defense contractor, can take 1% of their contract value and put it into IR&D. And we just want to make certain that it was being productively used and not duplicative of somebody else. Curious R&D role office, it was called Ocean Control. And our sole purpose was looking at all of the ships and sonars and weapon systems and electronic warfare systems to ensure that they were consistent with what we as an office felt was consistent for the Navy. And somewhere along the line, this office came to being because there were so many different navies that the DDR&E, the Director of Defense Research Engineering, could not figure out which Navy was speaking to him. So that was our role, to bring sense to that. The RNL, absolutely my favorite command. We made 2 tours in this. One was to Northern Europe and one to the Mediterranean. In Northern Europe, I had the 3-star U.S. Admiral on board for NATO operations with the other countries. And that NATO has gotten bigger up there now. I got a speeding ticket when I went into Amsterdam. I was approaching a railroad station with the pilot on board, railroad track that went across the canal. And he said, not to worry, it's going to open before you get there. Well, I kept watching and it didn't know. And so I said, Mr. Pilot, I'll have to take con and we'll just wait till it. So I put the ship crossways and a strong wind coming out from the south that would have pushed us right off. So I put my nose into the wind, and we just sat there in the canal for another 15 minutes before that bridge trestle finally opened up. And then when it came time to go, I kicked it ahead 2/3 and got a steerage way, and then dropped it again. But we were close enough that I didn't get the speed all the way down. And there was a little boat tied alongside, like a rowboat. And it banged up against the side. And later on, I heard about it. We were having a state affair, cocktail party, and this policeman comes running in and saying, "Where's the commanding officer of the RNL?" And I'm here. What do you want? you've damaged a boat. We not want restitution. And I said, that's easy. See that gentleman over there from the State Department, and he'll take care of you. I later, when I was back at the Surface Forces, that was a $300 damage. It came out when I got there and saw the same bill, $900. So it's funny how these things grow. We were going to do Thanksgiving dinner, and we were coming back from this Northern European tour, and the North Sea wind was horrible, and the seas, ground swells were bad, and we were rolling back and forth. Well, the cook was in there trying to grease up the turkeys and get them ready for Thanksgiving Day. And darned if they didn't fall off and onto the floor and slide around. The ship would roll the other way, they'd slide the other way. They were running around trying to capture these things and get them up and get them cleaned up, and they did it. And darned if the ship didn't roll again. So they threw up their hands and went to the boss and said, we can't do this anymore. We have to have a steady platform. So bang, bang, bang on my door. Captain, we can't have Thanksgiving dinner. Why not? Because the ship's rolling too much. So I went next door to the admiral and said, okay, no Thanksgiving dinner or we change course. He says, change course for all. So we changed course and had a great Thanksgiving meal. Afterwards, we rolled back, and we rolled a bunch. Some people are sensitive to roll. Some people are sensitive to pitch. I don't know how the crew did. I never heard. In the Mediterranean, the most unique thing that we did there was meet the Kiev. That was the Soviet Union's first aircraft carrier. And it wasn't really an aircraft carrier. It was a platform for VSTOL operations. And the bow, and it was a canted deck, and it had big cruiser-like missile launchers and things on the bow of the ship. So it was really a weird-looking thing. And but they had VSTOL operations, and our job was to welcome them to the Mediterranean. They had been following us very closely, all of our carriers, for years, so my job was to reciprocate, and I did. This little anecdote here, before we went to the Mediterranean, we went to Montano Bay and did the normal training that ships go through there, 4 or 5 weeks of damage control training and gun shooting, and I mean just everything that operates every part of the ship, the warfighting capability. And it's pretty gruesome. It runs early in the day and late at night. And when we're done with that, then we go over to Roosevelt Roads and shoot missiles. The missiles here are that kind, carrier missiles. And they fly drones out there, and our job is to pick them up and shoot them down. And we did pretty well. And when we got done with that, we headed north. And by golly, you know, the crew was tired, and so we went on holiday routine. No one had to do anything. Sleep if you want to, lie on the deck, sunbathe, whatever you want to do. And but I looked down, and there wasn't a soul topside. So I went down, and I thought I'd take a look at how much cleanup we're going to have to do when we get back in port. And I walked down, and as soon as I got down to the 01 level, I saw some motion behind me. And I looked back, and there was a young man standing outside of the lifelines, holding on to the lifelines behind him, mesmerized. And so I thought, this guy's about ready to jump. And so I went quietly up behind him, just about got to him before he heard me coming and let go. And I reached through the lifelines. I was able to grab his belt and pull him back up against the lifelines. And I called up to the signal bridge, where we always have people up in here, and said, "Give me the master arms." And so, boom, they passed the word out. And here comes the master arms through the back door. And he looks at the flailing guy and me down there holding on to him. And the only thing he said was, "Which way, Captain?" That's loyalty. We got him back sedated and home to the hospital. We never saw him again. I then went to surface warfare officer in the Atlantic Fleet. I was the operations officer, and the purpose of the function of the Surface Force Atlantic is to get ships ready to go, get them trained, get them provisioned, do all the things that make them ready for war, and then send them out to the wartime commanders, commander in the Sixth Fleet or the North Atlantic or the Pacific Fleet or wherever. And that's tedious because you have 70 ships that are not doing all that you'd like to do, but you have to make certain they do. And so you're riding on each one, and there's a whole business of reporting that you can keep track of where they are and what they're doing about it and so on. And they all have maintenance problems, so you have to absolutely manage that. This was my first encounter with women in the Navy. I preceded them all the way through. Worked on a ship that was converted so that they could go into it once they arrived. But these ladies were in a JAG Corps. They were lawyers. And they were reviewing the courts-martial that would come up to be reviewed. And they did a brilliant job. They were absolutely very sensitive to it, but they really didn't know how to talk Navy. It's on the right side or the left side, as opposed to the port side or the starboard side. And so we had, every time that they'd do it, they'd send a report up. I'd read it, and it was just a great report. And then I'd have to sit down and edit a few things out of there, and they'd clear that up. After time, it got a little better. Then I went to be Chief of Staff, and that's where I did that Women in the Navy part down here. And then I got selected for flag and assigned to the Saudi Naval Expansion Program. It had gotten underway without me, and some things were fixed. The Foreign Military Sales Program was $15 billion, 2 naval bases, 1 jet and 1 Jubail, 1 Pacific and 1 West Coast and East Coast, and a headquarters at Riyadh. We did 17 ships, 4 minesweepers, 4, well, I'll show you in a minute. And every time I went over there, they'd have great big banquets, and finally I got them to stop that because I went over there once a week for 4 years. And my goal here was to get the program on track and working, and so they finally stopped this. But I'll remember those great, magnificent banquets. If they figured 10% of the food was eaten, that's okay. The other 90% would go to the wait staff that had been putting on the meal. And the Saudi program specifically was in-country component and a USA component. The in-country component, building military cities, the things that were military related were hardened command centers. I mean hardened, like 40 feet underground with nothing but sand on top. So we had water problems when you get down that lead. Maintenance yards for ship repairs, logistic facilities, big supply depots for ammo, and training facilities. And then family housing, schools, mosques, and the other stuff. The way we the military work it, the Seabees have certain parts of the world that they do work in, and the Corps of Engineers have other parts. The Corps of Engineers was my agent out here for all this maintenance. They'd build the maintenance yard, and we'd put the stuff in it. So that's kind of the way it went. And building ships, 4 minesweepers, 4 PCGs, we call them patrol craft, they call them corvettes, 9 patrol craft, fast attack. These had sonars in them, so that would have been a little different. Let me see the next slide. That gives you a little picture of what they look like. That's a close-in weapon system, CIWS. All of our ships at sea have that. Here's a Harpoon missile. All of our ships at sea have Harpoon missiles. Here are homing torpedo tubes. All of our ships at sea have homing torpedoes. So these were pretty well. Now, we probably maintain the technology a little bit better than they do, but nonetheless, that's a sonar. And so this was capable of going after the Iranian submarines. PCG was the same thing. There are the Harpoon missiles again. There's a CIWS. And all the electronics were the same between the two ships. The propulsion systems were identical between the two ships, so we had lots of commonality for training and maintenance and supply. And the 4 minesweepers went over first because mine countermeasures thought that that was going to be a big hot potato. Never materialized, but nonetheless they went over there and they were good ships. Saudi sailor training, we would take them off the backs of camels. I mean, they didn't know a word of English. They had no mechanical background. They had no nautical background. So, you know, you can imagine what it was like to take people with that kind of a background and get down here and operate those ships. So we went into foreign language school in Texas at what was then the Army Language School. I don't know what they call it now, but each ship crew was an entity, and they would go through as one unit. So we had 17 units pass through the system. After they completed schools, they'd go to the Navy Training Center in San Diego for boot camp, and then we'd send them to specific equipment training, like gas turbine maintenance or radio equipment maintenance and that sort of thing. And then we'd bring them down to Little Creek, where we did the shipboard training and seamanship training, and that's what all these buildings are here. And it was very difficult because the Saudis were prone, if they slacked off and didn't do something properly, and there was an accident because of that, it was inshallah, God's will. And so we had to come up with a system that would override that, and so we had an extensive check system where each and every item that had to be attended to, that they would initial, and our trainer would initial it. So when something went wrong, we could go right back and say, look, you signed off on this. That's your problem. You took care of that. You screwed up. So we overcame that problem. After I left the Saudi program, we hadn't delivered quite all the ships, but most of them. I went to OpNav, Chief of Naval Operations Staff, and the military strategic sea lift program bit me in the rear end. We had no OpNav advocacy for strategic sea lift other than Military Sea Lift Command, which is military cruise. 90% of all war material moves by sea, and yet we had a responsibility but not a mission. But the stars were in alignment, and we established a mission for the Navy for strategic sea lift. That's really important because that gave budget visibility, and right off the bat we got 8 unwanted high-speed oil-fired container ships. I suppose they're rust now. This is 30 years ago. We converted them to roll-on, roll-off configuration along with existing government and commercial ships. We had the ability to get the Army to meet that objective, 10 divisions in 10 days on the Eastern Front. Those 8 wanted high-speed unwanted high-speed oil-fired container ships could do the ocean in 4 days. So that was pretty good. We did a lot of things on ship-to-shore also, along with that, and the Army was so pleased that with the work that he and I had done on this program, that this Chief of Staff, logistic head of the Army, gave us both a Legion of Merit, and that's what this ceremony is all about. I think that's one of the proudest medals I got. And then I retired. And my post years were computers, technology, and volunteerism and fun. So let's see what that looks like. I started up a joint venture with the Naval Institute, building a unclassified military database for all of the nations, for all of the ships and forces in the world. And it turned out that was a very dynamic thing because, you know, one coup changes the whole picture almost immediately. And so we were very hard at trying to work on that. We found that even with working on it and maintaining it, that the number of people in the world who were interested in it were not that great. And so there was not a lot of cash input to offset their investment. And so we eventually sold it to another corporation who was going to give it a try. And I think it's still alive. We moved to Colorado. My brother-in-law had been in family business for years and years and years, and they had done all kinds of things with pencil and paper, and he wanted to change it to a computer-augmented process. Well, they obviously were suffering because after 80 years of doing the same thing, the technology had moved on. And that was fortunate in a way because there were a lot of computer-augmented processes. It's a matter of picking one that matched them best. And boy, I tell you, that it changed the whole attitude of how to handle bid day on things of significance. While out there, I became very enamored with Echo Lake and Rocky Mountain National Park. Rocky Mountains. All those mountains in Alaska, I miss them. Out here, I don't see them. When I go west, I see them. Came back here to be near town, Bill, and granddaughter Morgan, who's not here tonight. Like everyone else, retired, I got involved in activities. I cared for my wife for about 20 years, and she finally passed away in 2017. And I moved to TidePointe, and Tamara had moved here 1 year earlier. We'd been visiting down here and playing tennis to our heart's content since 1982. When I got here, I went into building 300, one-bedroom place, and I thought that was pretty good. It was slightly bigger than the quarters I had as a flag officer aboard ship. And then I moved to Spruce Court after the price being asked was so small I couldn't pass it up. So we gutted it and built it back. Did a lot of travel with TidePointe and with family. And I became active in TidePointe activities, board of directors. I still am a member. We're near the end. And I'm chair of the renovation committee. And the future, 2 points, 3 points, 3 stars. Renovation, that's high on my list to get it done. Second one is this ship right here is the USS Zumwalt. There are 3 of those that have been built. The curious design is to keep them from being susceptible to radar reflections and be a little more stealth. And but the equipment's planned for those haven't materialized yet. And they've now been designated as hypersonic missile platforms, all 3 of them. And hypersonic missile, if you haven't followed that, is something you want to follow because that missile can go anywhere in the world in 1 hour. 1 hour. And it's remote. It can be autonomous, or it can be guided. It can be anything. And the worst part about it is that the Soviets, Russia, and China already have nuclear-tipped missiles that do that. We're coming forward with one, but it's not nuclear-tipped, and one of the reasons is because we feel that the accuracy is so great that we really don't need to do that. The hypersonic is typically Mach 5, and probably in a dive before it hits, it'll be a Mach 8. And the kinetic energy dissipated by that is so great that you don't need an awful lot of explosive there, even if it's nuclear. And the 3rd star is the rambling wreck from Georgia Tech and a hell of an engineer. My granddaughter Morgan, she moved on from Georgia Tech to MIT. She now works for Procter & Gamble, and she's been admitted to the Harvard Business School. That's a star we just want to watch. Any questions?
Thank you, Dick. That was a very interesting program, well coordinated. It's great. Give him a big hand of applause again.
Donating.
Our next program will be on second Monday of the month, December 12th, Monday the December 12th. We have a guy that was born in Brooklyn and raised in New Jersey, and he's going to talk about 30 years of executive recruiting industry, and his name is Lee Lopez. Have a good time.
There you go.
Enjoy the evening.